Welcome to The Great Exchange, a podcast about examining the lies that we believe and exchanging them for God's truth. I'm your host, Brady Cohn, and joining me today is our guest, Linda. So, Linda, we're laughing because this is such a serious conversation, but every time we move, our chairs make a farting noise. And so it's like, I really hope that the cameras don't pick up those noises. It's not us, it's the chairs. So
I'm glad you covered that.
So,
That's good, because that just might happen.
Just get that out there
in
case it happens. So Linda, last week we heard your story of you've raised 5 boys and a daughter and have a dear family. You love Jesus. One of your sons went to college, came out as transgender, and then within about 6 months' time just disappeared. And it's been a heartbreaking situation for your family, but also Christ has sustained you. You've had so much hope. You've seen God move in so many ways, and you still have hope for your son that God can redeem and restore. And now you have a ministry to other parents who are in similar situations. And you don't claim to be an expert. We're not going to go over tons of just statistics because, data is so much manipulated. I once heard that statistics never lie, but liars use statistics. And so the LGBTQ world tries to use statistics to claim this and claim that. And it doesn't take much looking into them to see that most of it's baloney. And so we're going to talk about your experiences, your observations, what you see as you have stepped into the lives of so many families who are affected by transgenderism. Does that sound like a good plan for today?
That sounds great. I'm glad you set the stage that way because I'm not an expert. I mean, my thing is to just come alongside the brokenhearted, and that can be anywhere from the parents, the other family members, and even individuals in the community as well. So yeah, this is my sweet spot now. It's going to be, I'm hoping, a little easier than telling the story. So
absolutely, sounds good. So one observation that I know that you've seen is that parents who have a child who comes out as transgender, many times these parents had been in support of the LGBTQ movement, but all of a sudden a child comes out and they realize there's something wrong here. Like, there hasn't been gender dysphoria. This doesn't seem to be the solution to whatever is just suddenly going on in my child's life. And it seems like more recently there's been a lot more of this rapid onset gender dysphoria where it's more of a social contagion than a long-term wrestling inside. So what are you seeing amongst families and parents who maybe are wrestling through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that needs to be said is one story is one story. It does vary so much, but there are common threads. And that is one thing I've been hearing. And I do hear from probably just as many people not, in the Christian community that are facing the same thing, that they have a child that they didn't see any gender dysphoria or anything to indicate that they were struggling with their gender. But one of the things that's pretty common in this is that there has been distress in one way or another, distress or sometimes just a strong-willed child that, has just kind of been up against their parents too for a while. I mean, it's like I said, there's so many different ways that this presents, but yeah, what you were speaking of there, we have had conversations, my husband and I, with families that's exactly their story. They were very supportive. They talked about even going to gay pride, the pride parades, and like, we're all for this. We want to help. We want to be inclusive. And then all of a sudden their daughter just out of nowhere says that, hey, I'm a boy, and I want you to, affirm me and this identity. And they're totally shocked, did not see it coming. Mm-hmm.
And I think that really speaks into some of what we've seen about this being a social contagion. And even I hear stories from, middle schoolers, high schoolers, where being a cisgendered, which means you're still the same gender as you were born with, and being straight is like the socially rejected thing to do, because it's like boring and you're closed off. And so there's social dynamics that are playing into this, to where it's not someone who struggled with gender dysphoria from a young age, but they're told socially that this is the way they need to be. And those ideas are planted in their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are so many different aspects. And I think that is kind of almost, I know some people call that grooming, really even by their peers. I've seen that played out with a teen that I know pretty well too, that she came into a new school. Actually, I'm thinking of several, just as I mentioned this, but coming into a new school, it's hard to make friends, and then you have a group that's very accepting, and they'll find that it doesn't take very long where they're saying things like, "Oh, you're bi. I can see it. Look at how you're, trying to convince them, and just in different ways, or like, well, look at how you do this. You are," and just trying to bring them into their tribe, kind of, and so it happens in that way too. But I think there's also, I think it has to be said too, the online presence. And that's a huge influence.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Online presence, where kids find like these online communities. I've seen so many parents whose kids have been influenced by what they found on TikTok, where their kids didn't seem to be struggling. And now it's like their entire life is being informed by TikTok, and, or in your child's case, what site was it?
So it's Tumblr.
Tumblr, yeah.
So that was
kind of an older social media
Yep.
that isn't as popular these days.
Right.
But they find this community that seems to like have the answers for them, and they get sucked into that, and their identity starts to change.
Right.
How do you see that those online communities really leading kids astray?
Yeah.
What patterns do you see there?
Well, I think that, just from talking to so many parents, they'll attest that they have, their child has been distressed in the sense of dealing with maybe the autism spectrum is big, OCD or ADHD,
Being
or
a teenager is hard.
Being a teenager, right?
You're developing an identity and a sense of self.
Yeah, what teenager really likes themselves? I mean, so it's sometimes you have, and I think just if we're speaking of the online presence too, that the isolation that comes, when this teenager is not liking themselves, they're not, and it's whatever they're dealing with, that the online, that just being on their phones is a coping, just a way to cope with that, just kind of the avoidance and being on there. But unfortunately, there's just so much on there that's encouraging this and providing a new way.
Yeah, providing an out to the ambiguity that they're feeling, and that's something that I think every teenager goes through, because it's teenage years are hard,
Right.
and so there's these feelings of, who am I? And I don't really know if I like who I am, and we need to shepherd their hearts through that. But then they find this online community that gives them an identity, and the seeds are really planted
Right.
In their heart of, maybe this is the solution to finding who I am.
Right. Well, it can be very alluring, right? If you just really hate your life, or you hate yourself, or you're, whatever you have, it's not uncommon for teenagers to find an aspect of themselves that they're like, I'm uncomfortable with, and I think in a culture that's so hypersexualized, that can just really exasperate that as well, that just drawing attention to their sexuality, or things that make them especially uncomfortable. So for individuals that are in that place, and they find this solution that here's an opportunity to make all things new. You get a fresh start. You can be this new person, and that in itself, or just to say that I think too, the message is, well, if you're feeling this way, this is why. I think that's a big part of it. I'm having more and more opportunity to hear from detransitioners now, or just, you go online and you can listen to their stories too. And I think many of them will say that it, it seemed promising that, that it was a way out of that. And, I've often said that it's kind of the counterfeit to the gospel, right? Because he offers that he can make all things new.
Absolutely.
And we can put everything at the cross. We can let everything go, and we do get a fresh start with him. So this counterfeit says, yeah, you can start all over, whatever distress you're dealing with, whatever past you're struggling with, or here's a brand new start for you.
Yeah. That's great. And so really what these kids need is the gospel, and they need help along the way in developing a healthy identity. And as they're going through this discomfort of adolescence and teenage years, they really need us to come alongside them and help them develop a healthy identity that can come from the gospel, and give them a way out from the uncomfortableness that they're feeling.
Right.
I heard a story a while back of a family in Colorado, and their daughter hadn't struggled with any type of gender dysphoria, and she says now that she hadn't. But this kind of leads to some of the things happening in public schools. There was a GSA, or Gay Straight Alliance Club, that met under the guise of being an art club. And so because it was secretly actually a GSA club, but they were telling parents and advertising it as an art club so that kids could secretly go to it. And so their daughter was invited, and the person speaking, I think one of the faculty in the school said at the meeting, well, if you're uncomfortable with your body, then it means that you're transgender. And it's like, what teenager isn't uncomfortable with her body? And she'd just started going through puberty, starting to develop breasts. It's like, that's uncomfortable for everyone.
Right.
And so the idea was planted in her mind that I think that I guess I'm transgender. And she went through anxiety, depression. And when the parents expressed concern, the school actually called CPS on them, because they consider that to be like child abuse, to not affirm this ideology. And this ideology was planted in their daughters' minds. And so we see this happening in public schools. And I want to say that there are amazing public school teachers. There's amazing public school administrators. We have to be cautious and not throw them all under the bus.
Right.
But there's some alarming things happening, and I think one in public schools, and I think one of the most alarming aspects is the support of this ideology that happens secretly. And I just had a pastor chat with me recently where he has in his church, a lot of public school teachers, administrators, and they are their district is forcing a policy on them of, forcing them to use kids' preferred pronouns, but also doing aspects in the schools to help kids gender transition, and it has to be kept a secret from the parents, because they've said that telling the parents that their child is transitioning is outing them, is the terminology that they're using. And I think that's ridiculous. And when stuff is happening secretly, that's what groomers do.
Right.
That they can grab a hold of our kids and plant ideas in their mind and prepare them for abuse, and it's done secretly.
Right.
And I think that should be one of our biggest concerns when anything in our schools is done secretly. So what should parents be aware of there? How do we fight back? It's like I'm going to have someone on the podcast in the near future talking about fighting back with public policy, with passing laws. I don't think that that's been your forte of what you've pursued, but you've walked alongside parents. And so what should parents be vigilant of with their kids in public schools and some of the influences that are happening there?
Right. Wow. That's big again, too. I want to just backtrack a little bit, too. The public school, I think we sometimes put it all there as well. But, this happens in the homeschool community, too. Right. As far as at least kids being exposed to the ideology and, because
you have to be careful wherever they're being
wherever
exposed to,
they're
whether it's at public school or on TikTok or on whatever online community or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think it's just that, having those communication lines open if you can. And, from our personal experience, given your child, that can be difficult, right? So it's not always, it's easier said than done to, be in communication about what's going on. But what you're saying is true, of, even the school, the school district we live in. I've talked to educators and, both, some that are struggling with this and how they move forward, some that are thinking about stepping down, because they're only going to go so far as well. But I know many that will just go along with affirming, they've just said that, we want to provide a safe place for them. And not recognizing that ideology, is helping really craft for that child to see that, well, if they're the safe place, then home is the unsafe place. Yeah. So someone recently said it's almost like we're creating, kind of like the split personality or borderline, with these kids, because, okay, I'll live this way at school, but then when I come home, I'll live another way. And, that can be tricky if you don't have the relationship with your child. And how parents navigate this has been different, just depending on the family. Some have been very proactive, and when they've found that their children are part of the Gay Straight Alliance or doing, activities like that they've just pulled their kids from the school. They've taken some drastic measures, and that works for some and not for others. Watching this over 8 years now, I know parents will hope that I have some formula or tell me how to do this. How do you navigate this? And, we're all just trying to figure this out.
What's the 1, 2, 3 list of fixing this?
Right.
It's not that simple.
Yeah. Because I can tell you now lots of success stories, but I can also tell you that there are other parents that did that very thing, and their story, they're still in it, deep in the pain of seeing what's going on. Yeah.
Yep. I think one of my concerns with what's happening in public schools and online is that what we're being told is that we need to do this to acknowledge that those kids exist and give them a safe place. But the way that we're seeing it explode and the stories I'm hearing is that those policies are not acknowledging that those kids exist. It's creating more of them. So it's not acknowledging that kids with gender dysphoria exist. It's actually leading kids to gender dysphoria by making them question. And so we have to be cautious of that ideology and that what sounds like a compassionate heart of well, we want to have a safe place for all kids, even if they're struggling with this, but those same policies are actually causing more kids to struggle with it who weren't before. Because it's planting the idea in their mind and making it this social contagion.
Right. Well, and I think the reality too of that is when we start with that, where we're affirming, so early like that too, you're just kind of getting them on a train that is racing ahead. It's when some of these kids latch on to this idea, they're determined, that they're gonna be transitioned and they're gonna, go all the way. And so it would be one thing if it was just a time of these kids exploring and trying to figure out who they are, and just kind of stepping back and having some, grace in that area. But the reality is that there's the medicalization. That's just that next step that's so close. And it's always, it's seldom that some that comes out as the opposite, sex, that they think, well, I'm not going to transition. They tend to say that, yes, I'm going to go on hormones and I'm going to go ahead with the surgery. And so, I mean, that's the whole medical piece of that.
So let's talk about the medical piece.
Yeah.
And I think that for a long time, and I still see this said in a lot of places, it's like, oh, there's no gender affirming care given to minors. It's like, that's just not a thing. That's a conspiracy theory, and we know that that's not true. It's like I've met them, and we know that children's hospitals are doing top surgeries where they're removing teenage girls' breast tissue. And so what are you seeing from parents on how that is being pushed on kids and the results of that? Right.
Well, from the context that I have, just in the personal, like sitting down with parents, they're not consenting to it. So the families that are actually going through to have their minors, that it has been a consent by the parent. I can't speak into that well, what's happening in that regard. So, I don't know of minors, that are having surgery in our community, but I know of minors who are on the hormones, and statistically now we know that the chance of them continuing on then with surgery after being on hormones is, I've heard like in the 90s, percent of just that going on that way. So, I think the thing that we think about too, we put a lot of emphasis on the youth and the kids, and I think that's great. I love how much is coming out now, and voices are getting louder, and I'm really excited to hear that. But one of the things that might be missed in that is that just the affirming, the just affirming it in these young individuals is setting them on this path. So what I'm finding from parents is that as soon as that minor turns 18, or they become of age where they can make that decision for themselves, they are going and getting the top surgery. They are going through these drastic measures.
Then it's so implanted in their mind, they're so determined that is what's going to give me peace, and that's what's going to help.
Right. So yeah, to pull back on the medical is great to hear that that's happening, but it has to go further than that because of the ideology, the idea for these kids that this is going to be the answer. They've latched onto that at a young age, and a lot of them are holding on. 18, 19, their brains still aren't formed enough yet to be making these decisions. And a lot of them are, one in particular that recently had top surgery, her mental condition was just her state of mind. It was not good. She was in no place to be making this decision. And her general practitioner said as much, that this is not a good time to do this. She shouldn't be doing that. But she just, overrode that, went on to her surgeon who was, let's do this. Just if you have some question, well, then let's just get the next one in the office.
Yeah.
So it's the mindset there.
I saw the other day of a counselor where for kids to have like top surgery or one of those medical procedures, they need a referral from a counselor, and this counselor actually advertising that she would give kids that referral with just one meeting. And it's like that was part of her advertising, that providing that service of just one meeting with me, and I'll give you the referral letter to have these surgeries. And so it's just tragic on how it's being so celebrated and has become like this kind of status symbol of I'm helping with this when it's leading kids to so much devastation.
Right.
But then we hear the stories of detransitioners. And I think that those stories tell us that this modern solution is not working, but it also gives us hope that God can redeem and restore all things. What are you seeing in the world of detransitioning? What kind of stories are you hearing from them?
Well, they've been the greatest amount of help in understanding, obviously, right? Because they kind of they've been through it. So I've learned so much from them, and so thankful for the the bravery, that for them to come out and share these stories too, because that has not been easy for them either. They've often been bullied online or, face difficulty. A lot of them just want to be done with it and let's just have that in the past. And I don't want to deal with that anymore. Just go on with my life. And I understand that, but some of them are being more vocal, and so thankful for that. I hear stories that I think sometimes they just get so far down the line, they don't know how to go back.
Yeah.
And so I've heard stories where they were even like being, wheeled to the operating room, and they were starting to regret, the decision that they made. We know that from parents telling stories too, when these individuals go in, just in the same way, and sharing how there were individuals surrounding our son and walking him into the room when he came out. There are individuals that go along with them into their doctor's appointments and walking them through too. So there's this.
And those people are influencing them. They're not there supporting them and helping them process in a healthy way. Those are LGBTQ advocates that are kind of pushing them in that direction and convincing them that this is what you want and this is going to help you.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say for, a lot of the advocates, I mentioned the gal that I met early on when our son came out, they are, many are deceived and they believe they're doing a good thing for these.
They're helping people.
They really do believe they're helping. I think, many are just deceived by this lie, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the patterns that we see a lot is kids being drawn in the world of gaming and anime. What connections have you seen there? And I think that it's pretty easy to make some connections on, not that, all good things can be used can become an idol or be used negatively. So I don't want to put down all gaming or all anime or any of those things, because all things can be used well for entertainment, or it can be used negatively for deceit.
Right.
And I think when it comes to gaming and anime, there's such an aspect of becoming something different, of like, I can enter this alternate world and escape the world I'm in, and be someone different.
Right.
What patterns are you seeing there, and what connections do you see?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I know from some that I've heard too is, there's something called autogynephilia, and we all have disordered desires, right? And so, that can play in if you have a tendency to see that kind of being a erotic thing, to see yourself as a woman on the screen. This is one thing I hear more with spouses that have husbands that have come out transgender. There's just this online presence, and that, and hearing accounts even from some who've been open about their struggle, that they, that just becomes something, just see themselves as that woman, with curves and long hair. And so they get
so the idea is planted, and their mind starts to dwell there of, what does this feel like to be a woman?
And then, what I hear often too is they kind of get lost in that world, just it varies from individuals, some to the point where they lose their jobs, their, whatever, that just, it becomes very addictive. And, gaming can become addictive for many reasons, not suggesting that's the only thing, but I would imagine then too that, after a while you become so happy in that form, too, that you really, it almost creates more gender dysphoria, right? That you do start to find your own person, that you're more disgusted with what you see in yourself. So, I think that, like, all of these things could just be such a long discussion, right? How that plays in. And I think that, besides just the game itself, there's also connections with people in the games. And that's something parents have to be aware of, that there are always individuals that are coming, are grooming, are trying to make connection
and draw them in emotionally. And it's nothing other than grooming and trying to,
Right.
attach them emotionally and cause them to detach from their actual reality around them.
Yeah, well, and just building, the relationships. I mean, it's not uncommon to, with some of the stories that I hear, for young people to make that connection online with an older individual, who, just continues to pursue them, and and they end up leaving with that older person. And it's not like they came and kidnapped them, but they've in their mind, they've decided that this is a good thing for me in my 20s to be in relationship with this 60-year-old man, or so yeah, I mean, there's a lot at play there as well.
Yeah. One thing that comes up a lot is what should the response be when a married man comes out as transgender? And it's just so devastating. And, as my wife and I talk sometimes, we've known of these situations where the spouse is completely on board and celebrates it with them. And so now it's like, now you have a woman who married a man, but now she's married to the same person who's now a woman. And it's like, what a confusing situation. And so there's one aspect of society that celebrates that, and the spouse celebrates it. But so many times it causes so much devastation, and as you can imagine. And I see a lot of couples who wrestle through that and wonder, and this could be a whole, there's a lot of theology that goes into this, is like, is the spouse obligated to stay with this person? Like, is that part of their marriage vows? And I think without, like I said, that could be a whole different topic. But I think if you have a spouse who has transitioned, they are violating their own marriage vows in many ways. And so, so I would never tell someone that they're obligated to stay with a spouse who transitions genders.
Right.
That's not the vow that they made. They made a vow to their husband, not to a woman.
Right.
But we also want to shepherd those spouses and help them pray for their spouse and help them understand that God can redeem and restore all people. But that's such a heavy situation that could lead to end of the marriage and so much confusion. What have you seen in those situations? How have you walked alongside those spouses? I think that it seems to be, I see more of those cases of a couple where the man comes out and is transitioning to a woman, and maybe it happens and vice versa. But I just haven't seen a lot of those. But it seems like with married couples, I've seen a lot more of the husband transitioning.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware that there are women, but my experience has been with, coming alongside wives whose husbands have. And, that as well, when I think about the women, they often speak of their husbands with love, and they're distressed by what they see. I mean, I think in that case, it's not just the sudden thing, necessarily. Maybe the news of it is sudden, but they've seen a path, or there's something going on, or maybe discover that there's been more activity, or there's been a long-standing porn addiction, or yeah, I mean, you shared Brent's story on here too, and the way his wife responded was such a loving way. She was so patient, and her heart was for him all the time. Through the entire time that they were dealing with this, and she was just very. very dependent on where the Lord was leading her in that too. There were people that would say, "Oh, you should leave him. You should divorce him," and but she just continued to be prayerful and took into consideration her children too. And so not to tell more of their story, but it's been, some wives will try to stick it out for a while, but they find that as they do, the distance between them just continues to get greater and greater.
The person I married, and so the distance becomes so great that they can't do this, and so so I think that the conclusion I would come to is that I seek the Lord. Keep a soft heart for your spouse, love them, pray for them, trust that God can do something, but you don't have to go along with the change that they're making. And you, and there's many times in marriage when a marriage undergoes difficulty, whether it's, some type of infidelity of like, you can separate from your spouse and develop some boundaries without filing for a divorce.
Absolutely.
And that you need to set boundaries to protect yourself, to protect your children. So loving and supporting them does not mean affirming and celebrating and going along. There might need to be a separation.
Right.
But you can still walk with a soft heart and love them with a heart like Christ, which is, I'm sure, much harder said than done. And so that's why we need the body of Christ to rally around us in those situations.
Absolutely. Well, and too, sometimes it does have to, even in that, lead to divorce as well, just to protect assets for the sake of the family, just depending on how far down the road the individual's gone too, because it is it tends to be a path, that progresses, it gets darker and darker frequently, as they continue on. And I mean, it's, once again, it's so individual, with them.
Absolutely. Well, Linda, we have covered a lot of ground. Do you have any parting words? I appreciate your grace and your wisdom and discernment, and I'm sorry about the road that has led you here, but it's just an example of God uses us from the places of heartache in our life, and you've experienced heartache. You're still experiencing heartache, but you also experience hope in that, and that's hope that you're giving to others.
Thank you. Yeah, I would encourage families to get connected. One thing I've observed, and you probably have too, in support, is that when people do finally come in, they say, "Why did I wait so long?" To have that kind of support for people that understand it and have walked the path, and just can encourage one another. We see that happen again and again, and it's such a beautiful thing to see how God uses one another.
And I don't really make this public a lot, but we do have an online support group for parents of LGBTQ kids that meets on Sunday evenings on Zoom, so people all across the country. And it's great to have a local support group. I think local relationships in person is awesome, but that's not always available in many places. And so for parents out there listening, feel free to connect with me, and we have an online group, and I can get people connected in different places.
That'd be great. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Linda. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Great Exchange. And I'd ask that as you go throughout your week, examine the lies that you have believed and exchange them for God's truth, and be on your knees in prayer for our kids, for our families, for your neighbors, people who might be hurting because of the lies that society has told them. And let's be a beacon of light. Let's help them see that there is an out for the dysphoria, for the dysfunction, for the ambiguity that they're experiencing. And that out is Jesus, that he can give them a new life and a new identity. Thank you for joining us.